Hi, welcome to the video. So today I'm going to talk about use of a metronome, both when to use it, when not to use it, and different applications of how you can use it both as a beginner all the way up to advanced player. Now, before I jump into this, I'll just talk about metronomes. So let me say, I think it benefits most people to use it in some contexts, but you don't have to use a metronome to be a great player. Metronomes have only been around since about 1815. So all the composers like Mozart and Bach lived in a time period before metronomes were invented, and they were great musicians. So a metronome is a tool that can make you better, but it's not something that's necessary for you to get good at. Anyways, having said that, let's talk about how it can benefit you. So there's different types of metronomes. The original ones were mechanical ones you'd wind up, and they would have an arm that would go back and forth, and it would give a clicking sound when it passed the center. So it's kind of like a grandfather clock, how you'd have the pendulum ticking off the seconds. Now, the advantage of that type of metronome is that you can visually see where in the beat you are. So you can know, okay, especially at slower speeds, so you can see I'm halfway through the beat, I'm 2/3 of the way through. And so it really allows you to visually see the beat going by. Most people nowadays, and the one disadvantage of those though, my first metronome, which is a wind up like that, actually wore it out till it started clicking unevenly, where it kind of like go tick, 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 and the gears were worn, so it was clicking more like a shuffle beat than the straight beat anymore. So the other disadvantage of the mechanical ones like that is you can't set a lot of variables. The electronic ones, or a lot of people will use apps on like a phone, something like this, and as you can see, you can set the time for like 4/4 time. You can adjust it to different sound clicks on different beats. You can even make some of the beats muted so they don't create any sound, and then you can change it to whatever time you want. If you want, like 3 beats in a measure, you can switch it to that. Then put it so you can hear all the 3 beats. So it gives you a lot of options that you don't have with the mechanical ones. Some of them will also, some electronic ones will have different colored lights. Like I had one that had a green light and a red light. So you could set the red light to click on like beat 1 and then have a green for 2, 3, 4, for example. I'll get more into how you can use that in a second. So a lot of different ways to use a metronome, get a metronome. I would recommend just downloading one of the free apps, like for your phone. That was Soundburner, but I don't have any preference for that. That was just the first one I downloaded, and it was a free one. I wouldn't pay for the, premiums on any of these, and it did its function. It's a pretty simple function for metronome. Okay, so how are you going to use it? So when I start off, if you're just beginning with it, set it at a set rhythm, and then try and don't even play guitar with it. Have it click off a beat, and then tap your foot to that beat, and get that internalize of the rhythm. Now you could move your head, you could count, you could move it something else, but tapping your foot is good because you can still do that while you're playing on. So you can count and tap your foot, or just tap your foot. But internalize the rhythm at different speeds. So set it maybe for 60, then try it at like 80, 100, 120, and see if you can tap and keep an even beat. If you can't do that, then don't even put guitar playing in yet until you can do that. Now, once you can do that, the next step I do is try and read some basic rhythms. Now, whether you read them or just play them without any reference, what I'm talking about basic rhythms are stuff like chord notes, eighth notes, and then later on triplets, 16th notes, tied notes, dotted notes, etc. If you don't know how to read rhythms, I'll put a link up in the corner to a video on reading rhythms, which gives you the basics of that. But you can strum a chord, and I'd start off with just like chord notes and eighth notes. The advantage of those is if you are tapping your foot, if you're doing chord notes, every time your foot goes down and the metronome clicks, that's it, your downstroke. Now every time, if you want to do eighth notes, so it's going 1 and. The and would be the up when your foot is coming up, and you just strum up. So your hand doesn't have to change speed. So it's 1 for chord note, for eighth note, 1 and 2 and 3 and. So you just keep your hand moving the same speed with the metronome, with your foot, and you can easily synchronize that. As you get into faster rhythms, stuff like 16th notes and stuff, you won't be able to synchronize your foot in the same way. Your hand will be moving at a faster speed than your foot will. So that's a little bit more confusing. Now, the reason why I'd say it's good to read rhythms once you get into them a little bit more is that helps both your ability to sight read rhythms, but also your rhythm playing too, rather than if you just practice them from your head or from your memory, you're not getting the extra benefit of having to be able to see and play a rhythm right away. And even if you're reading tablature, rhythms are still written in the traditional standard notation of chord notes, eighth notes, and such. So even if you only read tab and not standard music, reading rhythms is still a beneficial thing. But you can also do it just by thinking of a different rhythm and trying to play it. What I would do, especially when you're playing rhythms that are kind of similar, for example, if I'm doing eighth notes, whether I'm doing single notes or chord, doesn't matter. If I'm doing eighth note, I'm going to pick it down up, and it's just going 2 notes per beat. When I do 16th notes, it's still down up, but now it's 4 notes in a beat. What I find if you don't use a metronome is people will start having the notes more similar to each other. So if you alternate between eighth notes and 16ths, the 16ths will start going slower, and the eighth notes will start going faster till there's not much difference between the two. So by keeping the steady beat going with the metronome, you can make sure that your eighth notes, 2 notes per beat, last 1 beat, and your 4 notes per beat, 16th notes also last 1 beat, and they don't start blending. Or if you go eighth notes into triplets, would be another good exercise because they're very similar, but you still want to be able to differentiate between those and have triplets being 3 notes per beat on your triplet eighth notes. How you can practice this is, again, you can strum some basic chords. Once you get into scales, it's a good way to start increasing your speed on scales, and also a good way to just get more repetition on a scale without being too bored with it, still challenging yourself in new ways. Now, one thing I'd say on this, a time when not to use a metronome, if you're still struggling with it, if you're learning a scale and you don't really have it memorized, you're sometimes getting bum notes, you're sometimes not sure what fingering to use, or your picking is falling apart, don't use a metronome then. Always focus on getting clean notes first, clean picking, and then get the rhythm down. If you can't get a clean note in a scale and you can't get consistent picking, don't worry about the rhythm. It's just one more thing that will throw off the things you're always struggling with. Get good, even if you need to isolate and just do picking by itself. Isolate what's giving you trouble and get good with that. Once you can, even at slow speed, play the scale cleanly, then you can put a rhythm to it. And because then you'll start focusing less on the just getting it clean and more on being able to play it in time. And that's a good time to add in the metronome. And you might isolate just one octave of it. For example, if I'm doing natural minor scale, the 2 octaves in there, actually, this one I didn't start on the octave, I started on the second note, but the grouping of 3 strings and 3 strings. I focused more on this one because I found the first 3 strings, the 6, 5, and 4, kind of easier. There's not, while the second set had a shift in it, so I had to do more repetition on that. So what I do is take a metronome, and if you're just starting out with it, you might have to go eighth notes or even quarter notes. Quarter notes are 1 per beat, eighth notes are 2, so you're going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then coming back 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and don't pause between the ascending and descending when you're playing it. Once you feel comfortable with that, then you set that at slow enough speed you can do it without mistakes. You can gradually move that up. The advantage of a metronome is it allows you to move up in small increments that you'd have trouble doing without a metronome. For example, metronome is beats per minute. So if you have 60 metronome, that means it's clicking 60 times in 1 minute, or it's once every second. If you have 120, it's clicking 2 times every second. So if you start at, let's say, 60, or whatever speed you need to start at, and if you add, a lot of the old metronomes would go up in groups of 4, like it'd go like 60, 64, 68, that type of thing. If you go up 4 beats per minute like that, you're only adding 1 new beat every 15 seconds. That's such a small amount that going from 15 beats in 15 seconds to 16 that you're going to have trouble doing that small incremental change without a metronome. But by doing that small, it won't be that challenging to go up one notch. If you can do that cleanly without mistakes, then go up one more notch. If you start making mistakes, too many, go back down a notch. And by doing those small increments, you'll be able to consistently be able to move yourself up because you're not challenging yourself that much. Most people, if they don't play with a metronome, they'll go from 60 and they'll jump to 80 or something like that. A big jump that's clearly audible, but they're going to start making a lot of mistakes. And then they'll go back to 60 and they don't have that in between of small incremental increases, like lifting weights. If you're doing 50 pounds, you don't want to jump up to 100 pounds. You're going to either not be able to do it at all or you're going to hurt yourself. You go to 55 or something like that. Same thing on the metronome. Go small amounts. Once you get up to a higher speed, for example, if you start at 60, if you get up to eighth notes at 120, you've doubled your speed. Even if you only move it up, from 60 to 64, and then a couple days later move it to 68. After a month of doing this, you'll have increased your speed significantly. So don't be impatient. Just allow yourself to move up naturally. And then you can start doing it in different groupings. For example, if I get to 120 and I'm doing 16th notes, then I can jump back, or in the 8th notes, I can jump back to 60 and do 16th notes. Now that's 4 notes per beat. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. So the whole thing in 4 beats instead of 8 beats with the 8th notes. So 16th notes at 60 metronome is the same speed as 8th notes at 120 metronome. And then you start over with that 16th notes at 60 and gradually move that up. Now if you have one that you can set different clicks or different lights, the good one on this for the 16th notes would be for the 8th notes, because it's 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 beats is descending, is set the first beat of each measure to click differently. That way you can kind of not pay attention to every beat as much, but make sure that when you descend, you're on that first beat of the measure, the click that's different, and when you ascend, you're on that first beat of the measure. Now when I do 16th notes, I could put the beat 1, 2, and then the third beat I could have click different, so that it's clicking different on the 1 and 3, which would still give me a reference of when I'm starting to descend, I need to be on that 3 beat. When I'm going up, I need to be on the 1 beat. And especially at faster speeds, then you don't have to pay as much attention to that in-between beat. As long as I'm on my descending on that 3rd beat, I'm in time. As long as I'm on that, I can always guarantee my 2 and 4 are also in time. Otherwise, I wouldn't be on that spot at the right time. If you get to 120 with the 16th notes and still want to keep going faster, you could just keep going higher on that. But at some point, the beat becomes so fast you can't tap your foot and stuff. It becomes a little bit harder to keep track of the beats. So you might drop all the way back down and do it with 1, 2, 30-second notes at 60. And then you can again go up. Now, at that point, if you get to 30-second notes at 120, you're going really fast already on it, so you probably don't need to go faster. Theoretically, you go up to 64th notes, which would be 1. The whole thing would be 1 beat. But again, take everything slow. So next thing to do, in addition to, so it's good for practicing exercises, something that's repetitive. If you have some simple, like this alternate picking exercise they taught, that's just groups of 6 notes, so you could break it into 3 sets of 8th notes or 2 sets of triplets. And then you can set it, if you're doing 2 sets of triplets, just set it at a 2/4 time. If you have an electronic one that you can change the time signature, then it will be groupings of 2 that are clicking. So it's just 1, 2 on that. Now, okay. Other things you can use it for. You can use it as a general idea when you're playing songs. A lot of songs will have up in the corner on the left-hand side, by the beginning of the song, it will show a quarter note and an equal sign and say maybe 130 metronome. So if you say metronome with that, that's the basic speed that it's going. Keep in mind, if you prefer to use like a drum machine or something like that to keep a beat, that's perfectly fine too. You don't have to use a metronome on it if you find a metronome too boring. You can use a drum machine as long as you can keep track of the beat easily with it. Okay, so, but as far as playing songs off like tablature or sheet music, using a metronome, I wouldn't really recommend it in most cases unless you're a classical player. And the reason I say that is you want it to be as close to original as possible. And when you look at rock, metal, bluesy, that stuff that's tabbed out or in sheet music, usually the music was recorded first, and then someone listened to it and tried to write it out in tab or standard music. Anytime you tab out or write out a rhythm in that's been played, it's an approximation. It's not exact on that. And if you try and be too exacting, it's just going to be a mess to read, honestly, because people aren't perfect. They don't play like a metronome. When the first drum machines came out, it was obvious that they were fake because they were too perfect. They actually started. I remember one of the drum machine companies, when the second generations of drum machines came out, actually bragging in their sales literature, saying that they'd worked into algorithm random mistakes in the timing to their drum machine to try and make it sound more human. Because basically, it sounds sterile and unnatural to be too perfect and be the same all the time. So you don't necessarily want that perfection. But when you write something on music, it's not exactly how it's actually played because the person actually playing it isn't always on the beat. They might be slightly ahead, maybe just fractions of a second, or slightly behind fractions of a second. But it will always be varying and kind of a living, breathing thing. It won't be something where the whole song goes 130 metronome, the same, with no variation. If you do that evenly like that, it won't sound natural and it won't sound like the song. And you can hear that on some of the tab sites where they have a computer play the music. The music doesn't sound like the record if you have the computer playing what's the sheet music out for you. So get the idea of the speed for the metronome, learn the notes from the tab, and that's perfectly fine, but then try and play along with the actual record of the original recording, and that will give you a truer sense of the rhythm. I'm not saying you don't learn the rhythm, but you don't need to learn it metronome perfect. You're better off to, when you get close enough that you can actually play it up to speed, play along with the recording than to play along with the metronome. And in general, if you're playing with, you want to play with live players, that's what it's going to be. It's more about listening to the other players and matching their speed, because it's not going to be metronome perfect. If you keep a metronome perfect speed, the rest of the band, I guarantee, is not doing that. So it's not going to sound that good. I remember Metallica interview talking about when they first were playing out the first few years. After putting out some of their records, they said that they were always playing them live faster than what the recordings were because adrenaline would get going and they would gradually in the concert just go faster and faster. But that's okay as long as the band stays together. If you're playing in a groove, that's what that is. You're playing with our musicians in time with them, irregardless of whether the time's doing this or staying even. It's going to give it more life. That's why conductors in classical music aren't just metronomes. They're telling the orchestra when to speed up, when to slow down, when to emphasize and change dynamics. So you want the music to breathe. Classical musicians do use metronomes more often, but the reason why they do is most of the music was written before recordings existed. So if they're going to go to the source material of the composer who wrote it, that's only a written thing. If they listen to a recording, that's someone's interpretation of that written music. So if you're playing a modern rock piece, the sheet music is the interpretation of the recording. But if you're playing a classical piece, the recording is the interpretation of the sheet music. It's whichever came first and came from the composer, and that's the one you want to go to. So if you want to play like Randy Rhoads, listen to Randy Rhoads. If you want to play like Mozart, go to Mozart sheet music. And then, listen to the other people's interpretations too. Okay, anyways, let me keep going. So other things you can do as you get more advanced with it. So again, you can use it in exercise. You can use it to practice different rhythms, to build your speed. You can also try and play ahead or behind the beat. Now this is a more advanced thing that I wouldn't do if you're a beginner or an intermediate player. But like I was just talking about how music has a groove to it and has more of a flow. I've seen some good players advocate to sit down with the metronome and purposely play like a scale or something slightly behind the beat or slightly ahead of the beat. you'll find that that's actually really hard to do if you're used to playing on beat all the time with a metronome. It just feels so unnatural to do that. But that's kind of the purpose of it, that you don't want to always be locked into a beat. Sometimes it's going to give a different feel if you lag or rush the beat a little bit on that, and you sometimes want that in music. And then you can bring it back on the beat. And that can also create a little bit of tension and resolution within it. I remember a story of Chuck Berry where they were saying that the band would play, I think it was the band played in a shuffle feel, and then he played in a straight feel. So, shuffle feel, you're going to, and he'd then play even over top of that. So they'd be slightly off time from each other. And that would create tension on it, intentionally to drive the music forward. So, it's okay sometimes to not always be 100%. Especially if you're playing solo stuff. I mean, myself, when I was coming up, I used the metronome a lot, but now I don't use it very much at all. Most of the music I'm writing is for my YouTube channel, and so it's me playing by myself. And the last thing I want to do is play like a metronome in that fashion. So I might use a metronome occasionally if I'm really trying to work on a technique or something else like that. But if I play a scale and I play even like that in a musical piece, that's just sounds bad. It doesn't sound musical at all. It just sounds like a scale. If I play the exact same notes though, and just change the rhythm a little bit, you can get different feels depending on where you slow down, where you speed up, and the rhythmic variations within it. So I don't do a lot of practice anymore, especially when I'm playing or improvising. I'm not trying to play like a metronome on it. It's good to develop that internal sense of timing, but then you need to kind of, like I say, learn the rules and then break the rules. Once you have a good internal sense of timing, you don't necessarily want melodies, especially. There might be rhythmic pieces you want very precise, or melodic ideas that are very rhythmic on it. But it's like a rapper is very rhythmic, but most singers are not. They don't have obvious rhythms in their singing. Even not to say there isn't rhythms there, but they're not obvious. That's how you want most melodies, in my opinion. You want them to kind of flow on it. So, if I'm just improvising, it's not going to be something where you can, easily hear, okay, that's 8th notes, that's 16th notes. So I'm going to have it flow more. Okay, some other things you can work on. If you improvise, here's something you can do that uses a metronome. Most of the time I don't use a metronome, but I used to when I first started improvising use a metronome more often. Sometimes I would just turn it on and then not necessarily focus on the metronome, but just play over top of it with the metronome going. That you'll naturally tend to, when you are emphasizing a note, go onto the beat of the metronome. That's because you can hear that in the background, so it'll tend to draw you into that, which will give, even when you're not playing directly with the beat, it'll give your playing a little bit more of a pulse that goes through it, because you want your playing not to sound random. You want, even if when it's changing speeds, you want to kind of have a pulse. That pulse might change, but you still want there to be one. So that can help you with that if you're finding your playing sounding very disjointed, for example. Okay, another thing you can do, I already did a video on this, so I'll leave a link up in the corner, but I'll just quickly explain it. A way to test your internal rhythm is, I came up with this idea when I was sitting on the plane that was delayed for a long time, and I was just bored, and I had my phone, so I had my metronome on. So basically what I did is I muted it because I didn't have any earplugs or anything, and I would set a different speed with it clicking like a 4-beat pattern on it, and then I would count that beat to myself, and then I'd look away or close my eyes for a measure, 2 measures, however long, and then open and see if I was right on the 1 beat again. If I was off the 1 beat, I'd try again. If I was on it, then I'd try for more measures and see how many measures I could go and still, when I look back at the metronome, be right on the 1 and not slightly ahead or slightly behind it. So that's a way, again, I did a video on that, you can get more details up there. But that's a way to kind of check your internal rhythm. If you have a good internal sense, that's what the metronome is supposed to create. Once you have that in my opinion, you don't need it as much, except for when you're specifically trying to work something that you think it can benefit. That you're having struggling with rhythmically, or you're trying to build speed with. Okay, so I think I'll leave it at that. I think that gives you some ideas to work with on the metronome. Please like and subscribe if you haven't, so I can help build the channel up. It really means a lot to me if I can get more people actually seeing my content. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.